you. Thank you. Thank you all for having me here this morning. It's been a little while since I've been up to Davidson. I live in South Charlotte, and I always remark to my husband what a beautiful community it is. I just love to come up here. It's just lovely. So thank you for giving me a reason to come back up here. I was reading the paper this weekend, which I know is probably not 100% accurate because we don't read the paper anymore, but we'll go with it. I was reading the paper this weekend and came across one ad. One ad said wanted an employee for a position that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's no vacation time. There's no sick time. You're constantly under performance review and you're not paid. Anybody want this job? Does anybody have this job? Sure. It sure sounds like the job description for a caregiver. So I hearkened back to my millennial, Gen Z, Gen Y kind of spirit and went on to Google and looked up a definition for a caregiver. And the Oxford Dictionary tells us it's a family member or a paid helper who regularly looks after a child, an elderly person, someone sick, or someone disabled. Doesn't seem like it's quite broad enough to me. So I continued to look, and Webster just said it's someone who provides direct care for another person. Well, if you're a caregiver, you know that both of those descriptions are somewhat inadequate. And so I decided instead that I would go to my Bible to better define what a caregiver is. So I'm going to use 3 stories from the Bible today to really help us understand the breadth and the depth of caregiving. I'm going to use the story of the Good Samaritan, Ruth and Naomi, and Jesus, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. So get ready. Here we go. The first story is the Good Samaritan, which we're all familiar with, but I'd like to read to you from Luke 10:25 through 37. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him for dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed to the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, poured oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him into an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. Let's look at each of the characters in this story. First, we have the man that was beaten. What do we know about this man? He's lying on the side of the road. He's hurt. He's in pain. He's alone, and he's afraid. The person we are caring for, regardless of the circumstances, shares a lot of those same experiences and feelings. They are alone with their thoughts. What is happening? Why is this happening? Why me? What is my future? Who will take care of me? What happens if they can no longer take care of me? We see this with our patients with memory loss quite a bit. Every patient diagnosed with a memory loss, and certainly other diagnoses, have 2 fears. 1, I'm going to be put away, and 2, I'm going to be left alone. These thoughts and these fears oftentimes manifest themselves as anxiety, depression, and anger. And those emotions push away people who at this time actually need to come closer. We understand this as part of the experience of the patients that we're working with. The next 2 characters are the priest and the Levite. They see the man and they walk to the other side of the road and keep on going. I've always been curious about these two. I mean, it's a priest, it's a Levite. They see the man and they go on to the other side. Well, we know the parable that Jesus is using is trying to teach us to love all others. How does this work? Maybe the priest walked by because he had to go minister to a parishioner who was dying. Maybe the Levite, at some point in his history, had seen someone lying on the side of the road and rendered help, and the assailants were in wait, and he was attacked as well. I really don't know the stories of the priest and the Levi. Really reminds me of a line from the show Ted with Ted Lasso. You all familiar with that? So he has this quote that actually was attributed to Walt Whitman, but nobody can prove he said it either. So we don't know where that quote came from. But the quote is, "Be curious, not judgmental." Have you been a caregiver in need and watched others walk by without rendering help? We have seen this over and over again in our practice. When there's a patient and a caregiver, their world starts to shrink when illness intrudes. One of my caregivers brought his wife to our practice, and we'd had our appointment, and Dr. Edwards finished, and he said, "We'll see you back in 3 months." Then Dr. Edwards left the conference room, and the gentleman said to me, "Shelley, please, can I come back sooner? This is the only place where I feel cared for." It happens. It happens. The world does shrink. Many, if not most people, are uncomfortable about being around sick people. And if you add in dementia, even more people cross the road. This does not make them bad people. It makes them a priest and a Levite. We really just don't know why they're crossing the road. But it's hard when we're a caregiver not to feel resentful or maybe offended. Maybe we need to feel some degree of curiosity. We try to work with our caregivers and encourage them to have conversations with people who are important in their lives. These honest conversations can lead to intimacy and can lead to those people walking beside us when the journey is difficult. Even family members who live elsewhere can be helpful to us on our journey. A person who lives out of town might be able to pay bills electronically. They may be able to order groceries and have them delivered to take some of that off the person who's caregiving. Maybe they can plan a visit. There's so much anticipated joy when we know something's coming, like a visit from someone we love. Creating a team is what we call this, bringing these people into our care circle. How can we include people? I had a caregiver who her husband had dementia, and his needs were continually increasing to the point where it was starting to overwhelm her. She was stoic and independent. Okay, she's German like I am, okay? So she's stoic and independent. She'd never asked her kids to come and help with the situation. Her sons, 2 beautiful sons, lived in the area. She had several meetings with Dr. Edwards and I, and we kept encouraging her to bring her sons in to help find a way to include them in the care of her husband. So after a few meetings, she finally decided she was going to write a letter to her sons, which later she shared with us. It was a beautiful letter talking about their father, her husband, what the needs were, and what her love for them was and what she needed. So the one son, he confided to her, "I am so uncomfortable. I don't know how to talk to Dad. I don't know what to do with Dad when I come." And so she said to him, "Why don't you come to an appointment with me, with Dr. Edwards, and learn about his disease and learn about how to talk to Dad?" And so the son graciously accepted, and he came to an appointment with us, and he went and visited his dad. And the first few visits, of course, were awkward. He was so uncomfortable. But over time, as he became part of that experience, he became an essential part of that care team. I was so proud of this woman for going across the road. and greeting him there and bringing him back over to where he was needed. In all actuality, when other people cross the road, they may be missing an opportunity to grow and to serve. And so one thing we can do with caregivers is cross that road and bring them back to us and allow them to also be servants. The next person we come to in the story is the Good Samaritan, a caregiver that took care of immediate needs. He dressed wounds. He got the man on his feet. He took him somewhere for continued care, and he paid the bill. We need caregivers like this. It made me think of the medical team. So the immediate needs maybe is the doctor and the nurse who are tending to those immediacies, the social worker who helped place the person in the inn wherever they need to go, the nursing assistant who provided the continued care, and the insurance company that paid all the bills. Okay, that's a stretch. I know that's a stretch, but it did make me think about the need for caregivers like this. And as a caregiver, you may be doing some of these roles. And if you're not specifically doing the role, you're probably managing all of these roles. So the tasks of caregiving are real, and that's part of our caregiving. But there's still more to caregiving than the tasks that are associated with it. So I'd like to share another story from the Bible, and this is about Naomi and Ruth. During a great famine, Naomi and her husband Elimelech moved with their 2 sons to find food. Elimelech dies, and the 2 sons marry women from the area, Orpah and Ruth. 10 years later, the 2 sons die, and Naomi finds herself away from home with 2 daughters-in-law. Okay, that may or may not be a good thing. Things had changed back home, and food was now available. So Naomi told her daughters-in-law, "Stay here and find new husbands. I'm going to travel back to where my relatives are." Orpah was fine with that plan, and she returned home. In chapter 1, verses 16 and 17, Ruth told her beloved mother-in-law, her husband's mom, her family member, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." A sacred vow. I will stay with you. I am in it to the end. Your people and your God are my people and my God. When they returned home to Naomi's home, Ruth took care of her and worked hard. Eventually, the land was given to her and she remarried. She was blessed and rewarded for her care of Naomi. All of us at some point in our life will either be a Naomi who needs a caregiver or be Ruth who is a caregiver. So let's look at both of them in a little bit more detail. I love Naomi. She is selfless. She is gracious. She is fiercely independent. She is unafraid to return home. She was no doubt humbled and grateful that Ruth agreed to stay and to take care of her. It doesn't always happen like that. The patient is not always ideally gracious and humble for the care that we provide. Some people experiencing the role change from husband and wife or mother and daughter, the relationship that predicated the illness has great influence on that caregiver relationship. If the 2 people had a strong, close, loving, selfless bond together, the caregiver can still have challenges and frustrations, can still get fatigued. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to that unconditional love. But if before the illness struck, the wife was a miserable, complaining lady, when she becomes ill, That doesn't change. Usually it gets worse. Some of you are nodding. I get it. Sometimes that gets worse, which then, of course, creates so much more difficulty for the caregiver. There can be resentment, there can be anger, frustration. Sometimes the lack of humility and the lack of gratitude actually is part of the disease. There's a condition called anosognosia. And anosognosia means that you have no awareness of what your deficits are. In some memory deficits that we see, that can become part of the picture. So I have no idea that I have a memory loss. So when you're asking me to do something or reminding me to do something, my reaction is anger. My reaction is resentment. My reaction is, I'm not going to do this. It's not a defense mechanism. It's part of the disease. And we do teach our caregivers strategies on how to work through that. So again, very different from someone being, unappreciative or having the personality that didn't lend itself well to being the patient, but sometimes it is part of disease. Aren't we thankful for Ruth that Naomi was so gracious? And then there's Ruth, the other character in this Bible story. The story doesn't tell us much about the stress that Ruth probably was experiencing, but I think we can probably make some guesses about how she was doing. Ruth worked in the dirt in the fields. She sold the little bit that she harvested to try and have provision for her and Naomi. She was concerned for her safety until Boaz, the landowner, kind of called off the guys in the fields. Undoubtedly, as soon as she walked in the door after this long day in the fields, she started taking care of Naomi. She was elderly, she had needs. She probably fixed her dinner, maybe helped bathe her, got her ready to bed. She had to clean the house, help go shopping, take Naomi to appointments after working a full-time job. Sound familiar? She didn't have time to foster relationships in this new land. She didn't know anyone. Her world had shrunk. She only had priests and Levites around her. The caregiver taking on new roles and responsibilities can be a source of stress. The person who never had to pay bills is now paying all the bills and managing the finances. The person who maybe every once in a while helped with dinner is now the head chef and the chief bottle washer. The patient stops driving. That's a real big one. That's a real big one. These day-to-day tasks increase over time and increase our stress and continually point out what's been lost. Along with the outright fatigue, there is sadness and there is loneliness. Did Ruth grieve the loss of the life she had envisioned? She had a husband, likely she wanted kids, pictured living in a nice home with Naomi being there as a caretaker. But instead, the life she had was living in a shanty, no husband, no kids, being a caregiver to someone she thought would be a caretaker. The greater the distance between our expectation and our reality, the greater our stress and our discontent. The greater the distance between our expectations and our reality, the greater the stress and the discontent. And the more we grieve what we thought our life was going to be. The story of Ruth doesn't go into great detail about Ruth's expectation, but we can surmise, like Naomi, that she was gracious, she was blessed, and she was rewarded. Our wise and gracious Naomi re-enters the story. She encourages Ruth to develop a relationship with Boaz. Guessing that Naomi knew that Ruth needed some short-term and some long-term help. Boaz married Ruth, and together they took care of Naomi. Just like with the Good Samaritan, God provided everything Ruth needed, and he'll do the same for us. I want to look at another story to tie this all together. This is the well-known story about Jesus from John 11. Jesus' friends, Mary and Martha, sent him a message that their brother was very ill. So he changed his plans and he went to be with them, although Lazarus passed before he got there. When Martha heard that he was near, she ran and met him a couple miles from their home. He reminded her, "Believe in me." Martha ran to get Mary, and they hurried to meet Jesus. Upon seeing them, he was deeply moved. He was troubled. He wept. And those around him remarked, "See how much he loves him." Jesus then called into the grave, and Lazarus was brought back to life. Provisions. God provided Jesus to Martha and Mary. Jesus dropped everything. He changed his plans, and he went to them. We need someone like Jesus who's troubled by our circumstances, who will cry and sit and cry with us when we need it. We need someone like Jesus to be his hands and feet for us as caregivers. Who is this for you? We have found in practice that the second best strategy for managing caregiver stress is having someone who will walk beside us and drop everything. We had a patient and his wife. She was diagnosed with early Alzheimer's disease in her 50s. She was young and she was vibrant and her memory was declining. And very early on, he said, "I'm going to need help with this." So he turned to his Bible and he started to read, and he found stories about God's army angels. And that resonated with him. And so he said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create my own army." So he recruited his mom and two of his best friends, and he named them his army of angels. He has a beautiful picture that he found online of a angel in armor, and that was his logo for their army, the three of them. By the time this woman passed, he had hundreds of people in his army. Such a beautiful story. Talk about provision. Hundreds of people that walked the journey with him. Jesus also reminded Mary and Martha to believe. Believe that he has everything you need in inventory. What does that look like? A cup of coffee in a quiet space, lunch with a friend, a surprise rebate check when you can't pay the medical bill. There's provisions all along the way if we look for them. I'm sure you found information last week from Amanda Buck from the Alzheimer's Association to be very useful, with many resources. I'd like to add to that our Practice, Memory, and Movement Charlotte has a website, mmclt.org. And on there we have a lot of information, not only about memory disorders and Parkinson's, but also things for caregivers and also keeping your brains healthy. So we have an entire education section of the website. We also do monthly presentations on a variety of topics associated with the disorders and caregiving. And Dr. Edwards has wonderful podcasts, a lot of them directed specifically to caregiving. So I'd encourage you to also use that as a resource. You're also very fortunate here to have many resources at the church. I was so impressed. Meal service, support groups, home visits, the Stephen Ministries, certainly Mental Health Matters. I thank Lucy and Cambria so much for inviting Dr. Edwards and I to be part of this. How do we assess how we're doing and if we need resources? For our caregivers, we have a mantra that we use to help them kind of see if they're hitting the mark on their caregiving. And that mantra is calm, clean, safe, and loved. So when we're looking at the patient situation, we say, is the patient calm? What does that mean? They're not worried, they're not hurried, they're not anxious. There's no challenging behaviors associated with their disease. Clean, physically cared for. Safe in their environment. Safety Are there guns in the home? Are they wandering? There's lots of safety issues around certainly what we do with memory. And then loved, is that patient engaged in meaningful relationships? So we can also use that same mantra for ourselves as caregivers to see how we're doing. Are we calm? Are we unworried? Are we not anxious? Are we clean? You all look clean today. Thank you for bathing before you came. But in the sense of our caregivers, when we talk about clean, we're talking about self-care physically. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you getting a break and going and taking a walk and getting some exercise? That's what we mean. Are you going to your own primary care doctor for care? The life of a caregiver is shortened if the caregiving needs exceed our capacity. So it's really important that we take care of our own selves as caregivers, our own physical needs. So calm, clean, safe. Are you minimizing risks of things around you associated with the caregiving? Driving being a big one. If you as a caregiver aren't feeling comfortable in the car with the person driving, then we need to take action on that. Scams is a big one. Making yourself not financially at risk to scam. And then loved, engaged in meaningful relationships. The relationship with the person, certainly in the memory field, does change as they're unable to have that same kind of connectivity with the brain, with the person who is caring for them. So we still need to have those engaged relationships. I do want to share a story. My son was getting married, and I decided to do a little project. And so I went to patients and caregivers that would come into the office, and I would ask them, what is your advice for a happy marriage? And it was a really fun little project to do. I didn't give the information to my son and daughter-in-law as a wedding present because I didn't feel like they could appreciate what those people were saying. You had to have some experience in marriage to understand what makes it work and what makes it so special. So I have this patient, and she's very advanced Alzheimer's disease, very difficult to even have conversation, what we call empty speech, not really able to put sentences together. So I'm in the exam room with her waiting for Dr. Edwards, and I thought, what the heck? I'm just going to ask her. And so I said, hey, what's your advice for a happy marriage? And she looked me dead in the eye, and she said, marry your best friend. So I go into the conference room afterwards, and I tell her husband, who, of course, we're all crying because, it was such a special moment. But it made me learn very early in practice with Dr. Edwards, when the brain connection leaves, that heart connection stays. People know that you love them. They may not be able to say your name. They may think that you're like, you're too old to be my husband because I think I'm 40 years old. So you must be my dad. I mean, it's just the way the disease works out. I will tell you, they don't know your name. They know this. It's an incredible thing that I witnessed over and over again. I did say earlier that the second best strategy for caregiver stress is to have someone like Jesus walking the journey with us. So what is the best strategy? Best strategy is Jesus. I'm reminded of a caregiver that Dr. Edwards and I became very close to. He came in one day and he didn't bring his wife to the appointment. He said, I just need to sit and tell you about the challenges that I'm facing right now. All the things that are just weighing on me. So we sat and listened, and he shared some of the things going on. And we asked him, well, what are you doing for yourself? And he said, I pray. He said, you know what? It doesn't change the circumstances, but it changes me. He said, when I pray, it calms my fears. It makes me feel gratitude for the resources and people and things that have been put into place to help me care for my beloved. He was called to care for his wife. He was in it to the end. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you from me. I want to finish with one more story. I came across this writing from Watermark Community Church in Dallas, Texas. A church member, Dan Fraser, writes, "Some people spend a lot of time thinking about what God wants them to do with their lives. I'm thankful. God has already made my purpose clear and filled my schedule with caring for the woman I love most in the world. Caregiving is a privilege and a joy, and I feel like it's part of the work God has called me to." Then he referenced Ephesians 2:10. "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ to do works which God created in advance for us to do." Caregiving is a holy calling. God has called you to no nobler a deed. Thank you for letting me share my perspectives today with you. I hope something in the stories of the Good Samaritan, Ruth and Naomi, Jesus, Martha, Mary, and Lazarus has resonated with you. I would like to close with a simple prayer from Ruth 2:12. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. God richly bless and provide for all the needs of these people gathered who have responded to your holy calling. Amen. Thank you for having me.